Okay, so I described the herbarium as a type of library, and each of these records that we collect is like a book. This is an example of a scientific record of a specimen. So if you're ever wondering what the end game is, that's it here. It's a little specimen with some silica gel, a spore print, a data sheet, and that's like a book that we put into the library. And you may not get much bang for your buck, and that's a shame. But eventually, 20 years or 100 years from now, someone like Fran will come along and go, oh, a marasmius specimen, I'm going to work on these. And all of a sudden, the work you've done so many years ago comes to life and contributes to science in that way. So we're just putting these books in the library. The library's empty. There's 1,500 records. There needs to be around 50,000 in that library. That's how empty the library is, and that's why we describe mycology as being where botany was 150 years ago. So big picture, it's not hard to do, and you're contributing to science, and you're leaving a legacy for yourself too. Your name goes alongside that record, and 100 years from now, your grandkids will go, oh, wow, my auntie was really cool. She collected all these records for the herbarium. There's her name there. Oh, because right now there's records in the herbarium that are from like Top Banks and Solander. And those records are really kind of spine-tingling to hold in your hands. I think that Sir Thomas Banks actually has handwritten on this, and that's the specimen he collected from the field. So you're becoming one of those people when you become a specimen collector. So, all right, so workplace health and safety guidelines. All right. So what we need to do is impart a duty of care to you. So we talk about risks in the field. You're going out in the field. I'm wearing my field gear now. So just by way of example. So I'll run through this quickly, the workplace health and safety guidelines that we had in place. One moment, please. Right. A duty of care. We have a duty of care to you, and that's what we're trying to present to you today. So, duty of care is a legal obligation to impart information. Field trip risk assessment. We need to identify the hazards in the field, consider the consequences of the hazards in the field, what could go wrong. We assess the risk of those. Is it catastrophic? Is it insignificant? And then we look at the likelihood of that thing occurring, and we get a score for each one. And then we implement controls. We put controls in place to make sure that if we've identified a risk in the field, that we're taking appropriate controls to avoid exposure to that risk. And then we monitor the controls. If, in spite of all the controls we put in place, something happens, we ask ourselves, what went wrong? Our control's not good enough. And that has happened, and then we review our control methods. Traveling to site. Obviously, traveling to site, you need to transport. There'll be transportation in vehicles. The consequences is you could have an accident. So we really just ask that if you are driving to site that you are appropriately licensed, you're not drunk, or it kind of goes without saying. So that's what these workplace health and safety guidelines are. They're overkill. We have to dumb it right down because one spoils it for many. So our insurance will cover people traveling to and from site. So if there's an issue, something happens, so we have to take care of that. We have to ask you to get to site appropriately in a licensed vehicle, so on and so forth. Whilst you're on site, there are issues. Quite often we're faced with precipices, trip hazards, and water bodies. The consequences are scratches, abrasions, broken bones, severe physical harm or death. So we ask if there's appropriate care taken, traversing uneven pathways, appropriate enclosed footwear. If you turn up to one of our organised forays and you're wearing thongs or open footwear, we're not going to allow you to come along. Okay, just keep that in mind. You need to have enclosed footwear, not necessarily steel caps or anything, but just closed-in footwear. Ensure your physical ability is commensurate with the foray length, distance, and terrain. So before we do a formal foray, we'll tell you about the site. Oh, it's a big long walk. It's about 5 kilometres, or it's only a 200-metre walk. It's not usually an issue, but just keep that in mind. Sharp objects. We will find sharp objects on site. The consequences can be cuts, bruises, or abrasions, severe physical harm or death. We just ask you to take care of surroundings, have appropriate protective clothing, careful handling and storage equipment such as knives. So we do actually carry knives, and we are allowed to. So this is one of my fungi knives we take on site. So it's illegal to carry a concealed weapon on you. But while we're doing this work, this is considered a tool of trade. So you can carry a knife on a foray with you, and it's legal. But take it out of your pocket when you go back into the shopping centre. All right. Other things. Yes. Poisonous or venomous creatures, we will come across those sort of things. It's not often that someone gets bitten by a snake, but it can and will happen. We walk through how to deal with a snake bite. So all of this stuff will come out again before we go on a formal foray. I'll send this all to you and I'll ask you, have you read it? And do you understand it? You'll be like, yeah, we understand it. Of course, physical harm, death by poisoning, cellulitis is a secondary infection from bites. I've had cellulitis in my wrist. I was kneeling down, taking photos in Mary Cancross, and something bit me. I didn't know what it was, but it was just really itchy afterwards. And anyway, I went to work the next day, had a full sleeve shirt on, and I was like, gee, that's itchy. And I was typing the whole day. And then at the end of the day, I rolled up my sleeve and I had a golf ball there, or swell, and then I had a line traveling up my arm. Now, if you see that sort of thing, that's cellulitis. I rang 113 Health, and she said, oh, you got 4 hours to get to the emergency ward. 4 hours. I was like, it's that serious? She said, yes. So with cellulitis, that it doesn't look bad, but it's just, an inflammation. And what happens is that the tissue becomes necrotic and non-viable, and you can get whole hindquarter amputations and that sort of thing. It's really serious. Anyway, I thought it wasn't a big deal, and I went to the emergency ward, and they kept me overnight on intravenous antibiotics for an insect bite. So it wasn't the bite that was venomous. It was bacteria in the bite started to attack me and become inflamed. And like a snake bite, it moves through the lymph system. Now, the lymph system doesn't have a heart on it. So lymph moves through your body. It's that clear fluid. It moves through your body because your muscles contract. So when you get a snake bite, that's why you immobilize. The most important thing for you to do with a snake bite is to follow doctor's RBC. Remove the patient from danger, assess the patient's response, send for help, airway breathing compressions. So with a snake bite, the worst thing you can do is run to a hospital, because when your muscles squeeze, it pushes the poison up into your body. So of course, obviously, you just immobilize the person immediately and carry them to safety. But immobilizing them is a really important thing. There is a video there, and you can look that up later on when we send this stuff out to you, and you go through the video. The video tells you how to deal with a snake bite. You draw a pen around it, you draw the time they were bitten. So you draw a pen around the bite, you don't clean it. They want to take the snake venom off and see what snake it was. Put a compression bandage on, immobilize the patient. So watch the video and you'll find out. Other parasites. I think the worst outcomes in this society that I've observed have been from tick strike. So tick strikes probably had more, is I think the greatest risk to us, and has had the worst outcomes for all of our people. Fran's had issues with tick bites. We've had other members, and it's not good. So prevention is really better than cure, is all I'm going to say. This is 40% DEET. You really want to keep this in your boot. 40% DEET. It's really strong. It's really toxic. And for that reason, people are like, oh, I'm not really into chemicals. I don't want chemicals. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't want a tick bite either. So mammalian meat allergy is one of the outcomes of a tick bite. So what happens is people get a tick bite, they get the tick removed, they're fine. Then they go out to a restaurant and they eat something like chicken or pork or a steak, and they have this allergic reaction to it, and they vomit, and they're really sick. They go to the accident emergency ward and they say, oh, have you been bitten by a tick recently? And they're like, yeah, you've got mammalian meat allergy. You're now allergic to mammalian meat. You can't eat steak or chicken or pork anymore because you have an allergic reaction to it. And there are Lyme-like illnesses that occur in Australia as well too. So if you've ever seen Lyme disease, it's pretty devastating. Like, you just become pretty much invalid. Chronic fatigue, really bad. So yes, this is toxic, but it also reinforces that you spray it on yourself before you go out. If you don't want it on your skin, put it on your clothes. But then it's also a good reminder to, when you get home, take all your clothes off, throw everything in the wash, shoes included, and then go into the mirror and check and wash all the DEET off you. And that's a really good way to kind of follow up on whether or not there's something foreign on you. So I can't reinforce that enough. Put your DEET on and then wash it off as soon as you get home. And if it's on your clothes, it's not going to be that toxic to you. Pardon me. So yeah, parasites are pretty bad, and scrub itch as well too. Has anyone had scrub itch? Yeah. So I guess, you know, we're telling you all the things you need to know about as being a bushwalker. Scrub itch is like scabies, and that's what it looks like. So you get home, and all of a sudden, when I had scrub itch, I just had like really itchy ankles because it was the one part of me. And I was just scratching and scratching, and a day later, like the skin was like red and raw. And the way you treat it is just get something like Lyclear or a scabiol. What you would get for scabies, it's pretty good. Sometimes it might be embarrassing going to the chemist because they have, oh, can I have something for scabies? And you're like, oh, I haven't actually got scabies. It's for scrub itch. It's a bushwalking thing. And they're like, oh yeah. So, but you know, it's just a reality. I mean, even if you did have scabies, you just deal with it. So a scabiol, Lyclear, is good to keep at home. And sometimes after a bushwalk, if you're getting that itch, you just put a bit of a dab on it and it'll treat it beautifully. So scrub itch, nasty stuff. There is an appropriate method for tick removal. Does everyone know the appropriate method for tick removal? Wartener. Yeah, okay, so if you want to do it the perfect way, Wartener is like a wart spray. And again, it might be a bit embarrassing to go up to the chemist and think, oh, can I have some Wartener? And then spend too long explaining to them it's not actually for a wart, it's for a tick. But whatever. So Wartener is like a freeze spray. Now, I believe Wartener is quite expensive, and you can get the same chemical from an automotive store, and it's used for engine cleaning, like spraying on, and it's the same thing. So what happens is you put a little card with a circle around it over the tick, and then you spray it with the Wartener. It freezes the tick instantly, which means the tick does not have a chance to react and inject you with poison. Then what you do is you get some tweezers, you put them out around the tick, and you pull everything out, and you clean the site with some isocol or a rubbing alcohol, and then put some, you know, a Band-Aid and so on and so forth on. Now, if you don't have Wartener, then you just intervene as soon as you can, straight away, grab tweezers, pinch it out, clean the site with some isocol, and then you're good. So that's that. Mammalian meat allergy and Lyme disease, we've talked about. That's what cellulitis looks like when you get it in the ankles. So that, you see they draw a line around it because it moves. So they draw a pen line around it to make sure it's not getting any worse. And that's how they measure if it's getting worse or not. The other thing is irritating plants out in the field. You know, I was doing bushwalking for the longest time, and I had absolutely no knowledge of stinging plants or trees. So I came back to it and I was like, wow, I could have easily been in a very uncomfortable place. And stinging plants, I won't go through the details of the outcomes, but basically it's gimpy tree. Now, I understand we don't actually have gimpy tree, but we do have a species of dendrocnide, which is a stinging tree, and that's what it looks like. It has those heart-shaped leaves, really nasty stuff. If you have a look at the needles on the leaves. So what will happen is you'll just touch it, and the specimen can be dry. And I think there's a story about a specimen in a herbarium that someone touched. It was over 100 years old, and it still had the ability to sting them. So you'll see those little needles there. They're like a piece of glass, and they're hollow. So when they stick into you, they also have some nasty chemical in them. But when they stick into you, they basically provide an airway through to your nerve, which means that while they're in your skin, if you just blow on the skin with cool air or hot air, you get this shock of electric pain into you. So if you don't get them out, you can be in that pain for up to 3 or 4 months. So the treatment at the moment is they put a very mild hydrochloric acid on it and waxing strips. So you need to put a little hydrochloric acid on there and then waxing strips, but really straight away cover it so no air can get onto it. And if you've got some gaff tape in the car, that's not a bad quick solution. Gaff tape and then rip it off like you're waxing your legs. So that's how you deal with a gimpy stinging tree. But before we go out on site, we'll tell you whether or not they're on site, and we'll show you what the tree looks like. kind of a rainforest recovery tree. So sometimes when they clear areas, they're the first things to appear at the edge of the rainforest. And they can be really big trees with trunks like that. But there are small plants as well too. Really nasty, nasty sting. And then of course there's wait a while and a few other things. The other thing is exposure. Make sure you're properly hydrated and drink lots of water. Ingestion. We don't ingest anything in the field, ever. So has everyone heard the story about the guy who ate the slug? The university student? They were drinking dare, and they dared him to eat the slug, so he ate the slug. Had rat lungworm and slug. He died about 6 months later. Looked awful, really horrid. So eating things raw in the field is really not a good thing to do. Now there are a few exceptions to that. When we find a specimen of Lactarius, quite often we will cut the Lactarius, and Lactarius, when you cut the gills, they produce a lactate or a milk. We actually will taste the milk because that's a diagnostic feature of the Lactarius. So there's an exception to the rule. No Lactarius that we're aware of are toxic in any way, and that it won't hurt you. And then when you taste the lactate, you're looking for nondescript, mild, bitter, or as hot as the fires of hell on your tongue. Yeah. And when you find that description, that's an important piece of information. Interestingly, you can't get that from a dried specimen. So that's something you would find out in the field. Yeah, and there's a picture of a Lactarius with its lactate that it's producing that you would taste. Sometimes we smell things as well too, but we don't smell everything. So with an agaric, you would smell them. You're looking for almond or aniseed or mushroomy flavour, and that will be a descriptive feature. Quite often, you smell mushrooms and all you say, "Oh, it smells like mushroom," and it's like smells like mushroom, smells like mushroom. And then one day you'll come across an almond smelling specimen, and you'll be like, "Oh, this is it. That smells like almond or aniseed." Some of them smell like cabbage, and of course, stinkhorns smell like carrion or feces. But okay, I won't go in the fungi known to kill. That's really about it. So just those things we need to be aware of. Incidentally, that's Schizophyllum communae. That's one you don't smell in the field. It's very common. Yeah, there's one here. It'll grow in your lungs. Okay, it's only happened a handful of times around the world, but obviously it's not something you would smell to diagnose. So Schizophyllum you don't want to smell. The spores will germinate your lungs, grow up into your brain, and cause an abscess. Pretty awful stuff. Okay. Normally when we're on site, we erect a sign too. So Fran's going to go through the kit now, our normal kit. Just so you know, I've got my kit laid out here. So if you want to come and have a look at this at any stage, I arrive on site, I put my sign up, I've got my spray bottle of metho, I spray my boots, yeah, because I need to arrive clean and leave clean. See that? Methylated spirits kill spores. We don't want to be spreading Fabulosa colostera into a site or something like that. So now I'm clean, but normally all my stuff will be clean before I arrive. I've got a first aid kit, got my knife, I've got my little thing of numbers, yep, my tags that I use to take photos, I've got my kit and my specimen collecting tray. So it's all there. If you're wondering about any of that, just let me know. All right, Fran, I'll hand over to you. Fran's just talking people through their folders. Fran's just talking about her kit that she uses in the field. So something to keep your specimens in. So we're talking about collecting receptacles. Here are some larger ones. And a tackle box can also be a useful thing. Can I just quickly, Fran? So I found the easiest way is if you have a smartphone and you just turn location services on. If I just show you on the screen, I've got an image here. Then what happens is when you click image, file information, you'll see that a location is here. See that location there? So straight away there's a location, there's metadata location in the phone. So if I went to an image and just pressed right click, properties, and clicked on the details down here, boom, latitude, longitude. It's all right there. So easy. That's the easiest way I find to do it rather than writing down lats and longs. If you haven't got a smartphone though, you can do it later on. You can go onto Google Maps and you can fish around and go, oh, that's where I was. And you can click on the map and get your lat and long.
For Penelope Sheridan and Linda Reinhold, I'm going to be going through basically all of this when we're doing forays together up north, and it'll be lovely to see you there. I'm not going to keep these headphones on all the time because I find it's awkward in the workshop.
Thanks for staying with us, guys. I understand it's probably a little awkward. A trowel? No, I just usually use my knife. So Fran's just talking about using a trowel and how a trowel is also an interesting, good tool to have, I guess, if you're hunting for truffles, or if you have a specimen which has a sclerotia that you need to dig up, then a digging implement can be useful in the field. An umbrella, a white umbrella. Why a white umbrella, Fran? So a white umbrella is useful because it can also act as a diffuser if you're photographing things, and it won't add color to your images like a color umbrella would. And it's also useful for rain. So Fran's talking about the usefulness of a hand lens in the field. We have some small jeweler's hand lenses available, and they can be useful for observing very small features on the fungus, whether it's small and hairy, has small hairs on it, or what the pores look like, whether it's pores or teeth underneath. So Fran's talking about the use of mirrors to see the underside of the fungus. Mirrors are, of course, useful where it's a national park where you don't have a permit and you're not able to interfere with the fungus. So you want an undershot without actually having to dig up the specimen. Fran's showing everyone a tripod. Sometimes a bag of sand is also a good thing to do for camera stabilization. Bag of sand or a tripod. It's a good idea to keep it simple, I find too. Instead of a tripod, maybe a bag of sand is not a bad thing if you need to stand your camera up. But just remember too that more stuff you have, the more stuff you lose. So it's great to have the ultimate kit, but then before you know it, you're like a pack horse in the field with so much stuff, and then you left your knife somewhere. So Fran's showing someone a rake, which we would use for truffles. I find my little folders also duplicitous. It becomes a kneeling pad. So I keep my scissors, my numbers in there, but then it becomes a kneeling pad. So it's kind of a good, gets wrecked, but you know. So we're talking about what to collect now. When is a good collection? So Fran's talking about permits now and the necessity to carry permits in the field. Can I quickly interject there, Fran? Sorry, I didn't touch on permits and protocols, but yeah, so what we do, it needs to be legal and ethical, which means we need to be properly permitted to go into those areas. We have permits in place for all the areas we go. So if you just want to adopt your local park, that's fine. We'll negotiate with the local council to get a permit in place. And there may not be so many heavy protocols. It might be just your regular park that you walk in every week. And if you got your permit, you know, you'll be fine. But a national park, notifications usually have to occur. We contact rangers. We say, oh, in 3 days' time, we're conducting 4A. And they go, yeah, that's fine. And they let us know there might be good wild dog baiting programs or something happening there which could mean we couldn't attend on site. But just keep in mind, permits have to be in place for the area. You do need to carry the permits, or they need to be available on your phone. So we've got versions in the cloud on Dropbox if you just want to put that on your phone. Or just keep it in your glove box. But what we do needs to be legal and needs to be ethical. If we collect a specimen and we don't have a permit for that area, it becomes a pirate specimen and it won't be touched by anyone internationally, or it'll be an untouchable specimen because it's not legally collected. So just FYI. Yeah. No, not for national parks. We hold the permits. The way it works is we are the permit holders. Warwick is our permit holder, and you come on board as a research assistant, and then our permit covers you. And then if you want to do meaningful work in one park, you can negotiate, build a relationship with the rangers. Say, hey, I live near here. I'm going to be coming out every couple of weeks. It's not a bad thing to do, and just keep them in the loop about what you find. It might be interesting. They love all that, and it's a great thing to do if you really want to get in touch with your area. So yeah, getting permits can be tricky, but that's for us to manage. Just need to make sure we do have a permit before we go collecting somewhere, and that you're covered by it. What to collect? What is a good specimen? What is a good collection? This is one I found recently, which I thought was quite a good collection. This is also a good collection. So Fran's showing everyone a Pictoporus. So this is an example of Pictoporus in good condition and healthy, clean, not infected with insects. So a good specimen to collect for mycology. So we want a degree of morphology in the specimens, young, mature, and old. So we get a full demonstration of the full life cycle of the specimen. As in this case, we have two specimens. One's a little younger, one's a bit older. I'm just going through some images, trying and find something with a degree of morphology. And we did find an Amanita recently that demonstrated a really good degree of morphology. Not having much luck finding it though. Here we go. So this is a degree of morphology you would be seeking, a younger specimen and a more mature specimen. And a very young specimen there, an emerging specimen. And that's a shot of the area that we collected the specimen from, which is also an important piece of information. Oh, here's a good example of the degree of morphology that we took recently. You'll see we've got them all there. We've got mama bear, papa bear, and then the babies as well too. So, so that's a really good degree of morphology. You'll see I've dissected one there as well too. So Fran's just going through a few specimens that everyone's brought in. But yes, that's a good example of a really good collection. See, in the images I'm getting into cap. I've got a sense of scale. There's a number. Every side of the organism. Yes, and it's important to get the entire specimen, including a little bit of the substrate. So the very tricky thing can sometimes be digging up the vulva or this sock at the base, the annulus, but that's a very important piece of the organism to get. See if I can give you a bit more of a view of things. Oh, perhaps on. So, Udimans. There's a question to me about the numbers on the tags. I have a spreadsheet that I print off. And of course, the answer, of course, is we have a format for numbering, and it's 3 initials that you nominate, and then you start at 001 and you move up to. So Fran has a specimen of an Udimans here, and it's left a spore print in the box. You might be able to see there's a spore print in there. So it's a shame we didn't have a piece of paper under it. We could have collected the spore print in the field and had one by the time we got home. Lovely. So with the tags, yeah, I give you the spreadsheet. You just type in ABC or whatever your initials are, and you start at 1, and you simply move up to 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 3 letters and 3 numbers. So I started at WGB 001 and moved up WGB 002, WGB 003, and so on and so forth. So Fran's just talking about the time of year that mushrooms appear and the fact that in temperate climates, you're generally chasing autumn, but down here in the subtropics, it's really just rain dependent. Although we see stuff June to July, it can be any time of year, just depending on the rain. Yes, I did just have one. And, oh, the shot, yes, I do. So these are the guidelines we provide to people around identifying fungi from photos. So it goes through all the bits. But this is the ultimate collection here. You'll see there's a wee one and a mature one, and you get all the information there. But that's a good collection. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember too that these are destructive specimens. So what will happen is when they land in the herbarium, someone in France could say, oh, well, I think we have that same specimen here. So the physical specimen will travel over to France, and then what they'll do, they take little bits of the gill and slowly destroy the specimen so they can look at microscopic features. And that could happen again and again and again, which means the specimen goes from this to this to this to this. So keeping that in mind, you want a good amount of material. We need to do DNA on it as well. So you don't just want one nice clean specimen. You want a good amount of material, so that destructive examination can take place and it can still remain. Some specimens that Fran was working on in Marasmius, I think recently, were holotypes that can no longer be holotypes because there's not enough material left in them. They've been destroyed as they get examined over the years, so keep that in mind. So this image is guidelines around what you need to capture in a photo, but it also gives you a good example of what a great collection is. A good amount of material there. A spore print. Yes. So we're just going to break for morning tea now. So I'll open up now. If anyone's still at the meeting or they want to talk, we can turn off their audio if you like. Does anyone have any questions at this early stage? No, no questions? So thank you everyone for coming on board. I understand this is a little awkward because you're not actually able to participate in the workshop, but just trying to give you as much information we can about what protocols are in place for a legal and ethical permit, legal and ethical collection. So again, it's not hard to be a specimen collector. It's really straightforward. And can I just grab that one for a second? I was just demonstrating to people that this is it. This is what a record looks like. And this is our metaphorical book that we put into a library. This is a specimen collection. You'll see there's some specimens there with a little silica gel. They go in a bag. There's a data sheet. It all sits in a nice plastic bag. And that gets lodged at the herbarium. So that's what it looks like. It's not a hard thing to do. And we encourage you to get on board. There are some things you will need to understand about how to photograph the specimen, taking a spore print, drying the specimen. So from go to woe, really, I go out into the field. I make sure I'm appropriately protected. If I find a specimen, I'll dig it up, photograph it, make a dissection if I need to. If it's appropriate, then we might cut it to see if it produces a lactate or have a smell. Basically, observe as much information as we can in the field. A good number of stinkhorns to make a collection, I guess. And again, I was just talking about destructive records. So those records need to go into the herbarium where they may be pulled apart by scientists, mycologists rather, all over the world. So I would say, you know, you want a variety of morphology, so you need to get the eggs, a bit of the mycelium that's around the eggs. You need to get the emerging species and then the fully grown one, and then dry them on a dryer. 45 degrees is the sweet spot. It won't destroy the DNA. So I would say about 3 to 5 specimens if they're reasonable. If you have something really tiny like a Marasmius, you want around 30, maybe even 50 specimens, which is a lot. But again, you do need a good amount of material. Thanks, Linda. So I'm just going to hop off the microphone for a minute and I'll be back in 5 minutes. Are there any other questions in the interim? No, a permit is not required to collect on land, on private land. So if you have a private property, and that's why we love private properties. Quite often people have these beautiful properties and all you need to do then is if we're visiting someone's site is to get permission from them. So if it's a private property, you don't need a permit to collect. Go to town, collect all you want. dry them, lodge them at the herbarium, and if you are the landowner, then you have the proper authority to do that. It's all yours. So knock yourself out. Yeah, it's great. We've got about 5 people who've basically asked us to go and visit their private properties, and it's amazing some of the stuff we found on private properties and reserves. So it's really good that people are embracing with that land for wildlife initiative as well too. They're rewilding their properties and turning them into really good sites for recovery. Side of the road's a tricky one. Sometimes if we've made a collection that we probably shouldn't have, we might say we found it on the side of the road. I think the side of the road's actually not we could get away with it. Long story short, I guess if we found something interesting and we weren't properly permitted, we would simply communicate. You know, you go on Facebook, say, hey, I found this interesting thing, and do I have am I permitted to collect this? And if the answer is no, but it's still of scientific interest, we would contact the herbarium, and they have the blanket permits, and they could extend it over the site, and they could send someone out to make the collection. So if we don't have the permits, then we can contact the herbarium, and they could do the collection and the permit business for us. So it's still good to have eyes on the field and report your finds on Facebook. So that's kind of the entry level for citizen scientists. Is I always encourage people to maybe, in fact, why don't I go to that presentation and just show you what I was talking about with regards to participating in citizen science. Just going to share my screen now. Yep. Yes. So Linda, Penelope, are you there? Are you on audio at all?
Yes.
Now.
Yeah. Okay, so Fran's here. She'd like to have a chat with you if that's okay.
Sure.
I'll just put Fran on.
Hi there.
Hi, Fran.
Who's that, Penelope or Linda?
Linda.
Linda, g'day. I'll be looking forward to seeing you on probably Friday of next week, isn't it? Too long.
Pretty soon.
Friday or Saturday?
And Tuesday week for us.
Yes, and Tuesday week for you, Penelope. Yes, that'll be good. We're thinking that we've been working so hard, we might try and head off a bit earlier than we'd anticipated. So we'll take it a bit more slowly to get up to Paluma and actually get to Air the previous night rather than trying to come all the way from Serena. And so it'll be just a trip from Air up to Paluma, which won't be nearly as long. And just crossing our fingers that the weather's going to continue to be fabulous for fungi.
Well, maybe another cyclone coming across in a week, so that'll help with the rain suppression.
Yeah, as long as it's yes, not too exciting. Yeah. Anyway, we'll be seeing you face to face shortly.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And Paul, it's good to say hello to you too. Love your photos. He's not on sound. He can't talk back.
Oh, thanks, Fran. How are you? It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah.
I was up your way this morning. I went for a little walk around Linda Garrett, which was really quite nice. But
oh, was it? Good.
Yeah,
good.
It's nice to join you guys here. And
yeah. Any marasmias?
No, I didn't see any. We got a nice little blue entaloma, which we're working on now
yes.
at the moment. So,
lovely.
No, it was a bit dry. We could do with a bit more rain, eh?
Yes, yeah, that's right. It's just dried off this week. Mm.
Yeah, but you had some good rain up there, though, haven't you?
Oh, we have. We've had brilliant rain. Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get a bit more. Fingers crossed. Yes,
I think it's forecast for a couple of days' time, so that'll be good. Yep.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah.
I'll leave you get back to it. Lovely to see you as always.
Yes. We've broken for morning tea at the moment, so grab yourselves a cup of coffee and
you take care.
You too. Yes, and we'll recognise your faces, Penelope and Linda, when we see you. Good. Okay. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
I've taken a break, thanks. I'm good. So yeah, that's what I was going to share this with you. What was I talking about? Citizen science and levels of participation. So this is really it. Quite often we find people are observers, and usually they're curious and engaged. And I really think that's the initial quality that we look for in someone, or that I find is present in people who have an interest in mycology. They're curious and engaged, and they're observers, and they usually take a lot of photos, and that's wonderful. But we encourage people to take that next step into citizen science. And how do you do that? Of course, the initial way is to become a reporter. That just means to share what you see online. Show and tell, hop on a Facebook page, SEQ Fungi, the Queensland Mycological Society, and become a reporter of your finds, show and tell. And we've had really meaningful outcomes there about people finding interesting stuff, and we've been able to act on that. So that's a really easy way, because people are generally already doing that. Hey, this is what I found. I took these great photos, and that's a wonderful thing. So being a reporter is awesome. The next step, of course, would be to become a data collector. Now, to be a data collector in the field, that doesn't involve specimen collections, but it does involve downloading the app, the iNaturalist app. So you would download the app, and we're going to talk about that later on, the iNaturalist app and what's involved. It's really simple. You download the app, you take your photos, you upload them to the app, and that's really about it. If you've got location services on when you take the photos, they'll automatically land as a dot on the map. They'll get reviewed by experts, and they'll try to identify it from the photos. It's important, of course, to take good photos with a lot of information in them, so that we can try to identify things from the photo. And there you go. You're putting data into the Atlas of Living Australia just by getting onto the app and uploading your photos to the app. And again, I'll expand on that later on. But what we're talking about today is about specimen collecting. And that's where we would like people to be, out there operating legally and ethically under permits and making physical collections of specimens, processing the specimens and lodging them at a herbarium. That's where we really want people to be contributing to citizen science. So all of that other stuff is meaningful, but if you find yourself with the appropriate amount of time and the resources, then get on board with specimen collecting and start lodging your specimens, start building that library. And then, of course, if you want to go to the next level, you could actually also volunteer at the herbarium, which is a meaningful thing to do. And then you'll find out about whether or not your collections are good collections, because you'll be working on them. You'll be packing them away in the herbarium, like library books being filed away. You might even try and identify them, work through some dichotomous keys and see if you can identify the specimens. And that can be a fun thing to do too. So there's so little resources provided for mycology and mycological work. And the herbarium does have a large backlog, so they are looking for a lot of assistance in that space. Of course, you'll need to be near a herbarium that actively works on building mycological collections. Unfortunately, the only one is BRI at Brisbane at Mount Coot-tha Botanical Gardens. And of course, currently, because of COVID restrictions, they're not allowing volunteers in. But hopefully that space will reopen again, and we'll be able to have opportunities for people to do more meaningful work on the specimens they've collected in the herbarium. And then, of course, if you want to if you want to go for the end game, then really specializing in a group is probably not a bad thing to do. And that's what Fran's doing. Fran's specializing in a group. She said, oh, I'm particularly fond of marasmias. So she's collected specimens and she's done a lot of work. And that's really a collaborative space where you look at the existing knowledge that surrounds a certain type of fungi. You've decided that, oh, more needs to be done here and more needs to be done everywhere. And you actively work on trying to identify the species that we find out in the field, or you might even have to go through the process of, actually scientifically describing a species. So that's all rather complicated stuff. And there aren't many people working in special areas, but there are a handful of people in Australia. And I talk about that some other time. So yeah, any questions? Cool. I'll come back in a few minutes. How to connect with others on the app? Yeah. So I've only just started on iNaturalist too. So I guess really the important thing to do is probably add it to a project. So when you upload your photos, you can add them to a project. But when you add them to a project, that project may ask specific questions about the specimen. I guess for fungi, the project to add your images to would be Fungi Map. So not sure how to connect with others on the app yet, but I've had people comment on my specimens, which is great. Find it really helpful for helping narrow them down an ID. Yep, that's great. Keep in mind too that an ID is good, because at the herbarium, if something doesn't have an ID, and usually we're happy to take things to genus, and we may not necessarily get it to species. So if we can get something just at the genus level, that's usually fine. And so if we can do that, then it can be filed away. So how do you identify something to genus? I usually get on Facebook and ask people's opinions, maybe work through a key if you can find a key, or on the iNaturalist app. One of the good things is that experts will look at it and they'll give you an opinion about what they think it could be. So specimen collecting is not necessarily about identifying fungi. Specimen collecting is just collecting the specimens, but it is good to get them to genus so that they can be filed away. But keep in mind, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is just getting the specimen into the herbarium. Sometimes we find something and we don't have a name for it. So what you do then is you put the term fungi in det on your record sheet. Now, fungi in det means it's fungi of indeterminate species, and that just means it doesn't get filed away. And an expert like Nigel Fechner or someone else will work on the specimen and hopefully then subsequently identify it to genus or even to species. Or we may decide it doesn't have a name and it needs one, and might be able to put it into a group and then narrow it down and give it a name. And that might be work that someone does, 20, 30 years from now, when someone actually takes an interest in a particular group of fungi that you may have lodged at the herbarium. All right. Feel free to type your questions away in the chat area and I'll answer them as they appear. All right, I'll be back in a minute.
So it is recording, but how do I find it?
I don't know.
So yes, it does do that. Anywhere where it's within range, it will tell me exactly where I am. But I just don't know.
Location services is on. I'm not sure about Apple, and if you have the option to turn it off, maybe you don't.
No, maybe I don't. But then how do I find out what it is?
When you so what I do is I plug my phone in like this to the computer, and then I import all my photos.
Yeah, I do that.
Okay, and then all you really need to do is when you go to your photos, it'll just be like that.
Yep.
Right mouse click and go to properties. Properties. Now I'm not sure what that's like out.
Maybe something.
And the properties will come up. See, and these are the general details. But over here, there's a tab called details. General
Right.
details. And if I can click on details, then it tells you the date it was taken, program name, all that sort of information. And as you scroll
So
down,
that should be on all the photos that are already in the computer.
absolute that metadata absolutely will be on your images.
Yeah, probably so I can put my photos. I keep my store my photos
And
on
they're-
an extra hard drive because there's so many of them.
And your GPS will be there.
Yes.
And again, if you don't have that on your photo, and sometimes I find it might not be actually correct.
It might not be correct, no. Which is why I use
somewhere
the
the location
GPS.
hasn't updated. So
Yeah.
there's a way around that. And what I do is I make sure that I go into maps and make sure that my dot is correct. And I'm like, okay, you know where I am. And then I'm like, okay, now I know the GPS is going to be correct. Otherwise, you go to Google Maps, and you know what we do? We go to Maps and you find the place where you were and you click on it. So you find the place where you were, and you say, oh yeah, I was here at Apple Tree Creek. That's Apple Tree Creek. I was down this pathway, and I was about there. You just go click, boom. Now straight up on Maps, you get this little pop-up thing here, and you click on that digital GPS here. And when you click on that digital GPS, it comes up over here on the sidebar, and you also get it in analog format here.
You do that in your computer, but there should be something.
Any browser should use Maps. This functionality is available from Google Maps. So any browser and Google Maps, you can use this functionality to find GPS. Good. Have you used the online version, the Chrome version? Okay. So yeah, I'll do that on the screen, the web-based version. Hi, Linda. So with regards to taking measurements, and I'm just going to share my screen to demonstrate that to you now. The important thing is when you take an image of a specimen that you have a sense of scale in it. So with regards to this image, I don't know who's measuring what, but I've got a tag here. You'll see the tag's 20 millimeters wide. So because there's a sense of scale in here, I can then infer. I can then measure the other elements in the photo. So maybe not a good example. I'll try and find another one. So you'll see that in this image here, I have a little scale here with 20 millimeters. So what I can then do is that I can then take that and apply that throughout the photo. So I can then infer, if that's 20 millimeters, the length is about 6 centimeters. The width here is about 10 to 12 millimeters. I can apply that scale throughout the photo. And that's all you need to do is have that sense of scale in the photo.
That sounds easy, thanks. I've been using vernier calipers to measure live specimens, so I won't bother doing that anymore.
If in doubt, just shove your finger in the photo, because I mean, you know, we're scientists. We could measure your finger and we could find out, okay, well, your finger's over there, it's 5 millimeters wide, and then we could apply that measurement throughout the photo. So knowing, in particular, like for rustulas here, knowing the length and the width of the stipe and all that stuff is critical information. So if you don't have a sense of scale, a clever one like I've got there with 20 millimeters on, your finger will do, or a 5-cent piece.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's easy. Great, thanks.
It is, yeah, just
Let the mycologist do all the work.
indeed. Okay, so I've been asked to share about iNaturalist. So I'll talk about the app first. So I guess when iNaturalist first came on board, I was like, oh, another thing to do, another app. You know, I've got enough to do, getting specimens together and lodging them with a herbarium. Why do I do this? But I tell you what, iNaturalist really is the way to go. FungiMap used to operate by, you would send your images with a location, the GPS, and then they'd try and identify it, and then they'd put it through the ALA and try and get it up there. But we've now got the iNaturalist app, and it's really, really easy. It's hard to show you on the phone, but you just download the app, you create a login. We've got so many apps, it shouldn't be hard to do for you to figure that out. And then it's really as simple as, like, when you have location services on with your photos, I open the app, I hit plus and make a new record. I select photos from my gallery. It automatically knows where they are on the map. You're done. Now, I've oversimplified it there, but that really is as simple as it is. I guess, and that's a great thing to do. So the various levels of citizen science, and I talked about it one other meeting. So I was talking about people show and telling their finds and going on to Facebook and show and telling what they find, and that's a great entry level. But the next step up would be to get onto iNaturalist and be a data recorder in the field. So you'll be out there, and be the one good time where you are walking along with your phone in front of your face out in the field if you're uploading images. But what I'm going to do too is I'm going to do it online, and I'm going to try and so if you don't do it on the app on your phone, you can do it on Chrome or whatever web browser you have. And I think I'm already logged in here somewhere. Boom, boom, boom. iNaturalist. So here I am on iNaturalist. So this is what I was calling Marasmius labelliae, and I think oh, sorry. Great. So I'm going to try and do that again, screen share. Okay, everyone can see that? So here I am on my web browser. I've got about 100 tabs open because I'm watching YouTube and doing all sorts of stuff, but one tab is for iNaturalist. So I've logged in, I've created a login and a password, and I've logged into the iNaturalist app. where to go from here. Log in, pinwheel, click on iNaturalist Home. So I'm just going to awkwardly go through it. Have I not logged in? I should have logged in. It's logged me out. There we go. Great. So I'm logged in. Now, all you need to do is up here, there's a little button called Upload. Okay, so I click on Upload. Drag and drop some photos. So choose files. I'm going to choose some images. So here I am in my fungi area. Now, these are the photos that I've taken recently. And I'm going to upload these ones. So I've got this and this. So I'm just selecting a bunch of files. Now I think this is Marasmius pellucidus, but I'm not sure. So I click open. Now it's gonna give me a whole bunch of, there it is. So boom, I'm there. Now what's happening here is I've selected 7 images. So by default, it's gonna say that's 7 records, but these are actually 7 images of one record. So I guess what I want to do here is I want to see this bar here. I'm going to click on select all. So I select them all and then I combine the records. Boom. And now all those images are one record, one location. So that's a little tricky, but if you fumble around, you'll figure it out. So I've just uploaded images. So you can upload 30 images of 30 collections or 30 images of one record. And that's what I've done here. These are 7 images of one specimen. So I selected them all and then I combined them. And now I've got one observation to edit. So over here, I'm going to say Marasmius. There's an option, Marasmius pellucidus. Is it Pellucidus? Okay. Pellucidus, sorry. Marasmius pellucidus. And see, there's one here to choose from. So I'll click that. Okay, it's happened. Bit of a lag. You'll see the locations already there because I had location services. Of course, if you didn't have the location there, you would click on location and then just fish around a map and drop a pin. Any notes you want to put in here? ID to be confirmed with Fran Gard, who is working on this group, this genus currently. One moment. It's saying select observations to edit. Da-da-da-da. Anyway, really all you need to do is upload the images. Maybe if you have an idea about ID, and if you don't, that's fine too. Just submit the observation over there. So you submit one observation, it's saving the observation. Yep, I'll do that later. So really, in this early stage, all you really need to do is add the photos, group them together, and then just submit the lot. And then there it is. So I can go back into that and edit it. So if I click on that observation, so over here, there's an edit button. So I've only used this once before, and that was last night. So this is the second time I've used it. So I think it's pretty intuitive and straightforward. So editing observations. So it's allowing me to edit the observation. So I can change the location. I can add more notes down there, and create a field. I'm trying to add it to a project. Add photos. You can add sounds too. If you're recording frogs, that's a good thing to do, because they'll do it all from sound. Back to observation. So I'm not sure how to add it to a project there, but you'll figure it out. But long story short, that's it. I've just added a record. Oh, here we go. So this will end up on the Atlas of Living Australia. So there it is. This is the second time I've ever used it. So I'm fumbling around a bit. And down here, it'll see this is the project. So you really want to add it to a project. So if I hit add it to a project, I start typing fungi map and it comes up there. So I click on fungi map. Now, straight away, I'm prompted to answer some questions. So I've made awkward observations as well too. So whatever project you're adding it to, they'll ask project specific questions. So fungus habitat, I'm going to say it was rainforest. Fungus substrate, debris and rainforest litter. So the substrate may be soil, it may be a log or a twig. If it's a log or a twig, you want information about the diameter of it. It was a log 1 meter across. It was a twig 5 millimeters across. That's very good information about the substrate. It was soil. It was another fungus. The substrate is what it's growing in. Is the specimen kept? So I actually collected the specimen and I'm going to lodge it at BRI. So yes, so I put BRI here. Yep. And the collection number of the specimen is, where were we? BRI means, yeah, all the herbariums have a 3-letter kind of acronym or abbreviation, which tells you what it is. So BRI is the Brisbane, Melbourne's MEL, Adelaide is AD. So this is the image, and you'll see in this image I've got this tag. So if you want these tags, I can give them to you. It's just a spreadsheet, and someone online was asking me what is the format for numbering. So you want 3 initials and 3 letters, but there's my number. So what I'm going to do is put that in my iNaturalist record. So I go back and I put, yes, it's WGB 938. So WGB 938. And then I add each one of those things to, so that's not a lot of stuff to answer. It's pretty straightforward. And then you go add to project. Oh, add them. So you have to add them all, and then it'll give you the option, add to project. So done. So in those few moments now, I've taken some images and I've just put a dot on the Atlas of Living Australia eventually. It's the same database. Yeah, so you either do it through your phone. So if I went into my phone now, I could see that record that I've just uploaded. Yeah, yeah, so yeah, it's so easy. It's so easy. So so if you're making collections, it'd be great if you could follow them up with an iNaturalist dot. Yeah, if you haven't ID'd it, yeah, that's fine. So I was saying to someone before, like we love to ID stuff, but Specimen collecting is not about identifying fungi. It's about collecting a physical record and putting it in the herbarium. Quite often, we will not know what it is. And in that situation, you just say it's fungi in det. It's a fungi of indeterminate species. And that's fine and well. There are a lot of stuff that don't have names. The unfortunate thing about that is it can't get filed away in the library because it's like a library book without a title. It needs a title. So we need to get it to genus in order to file it away in the herbarium. So ideally, we'll get it to genus. But on the odd occasion, if you don't have a name, you don't have a name. Just take as many photos as you can, gather as much information as you can about the site, about the specimen, and then all of that information will then probably be worked on later on, and someone might get it to genus or even to species. We have a question. It's about a slime mold. Was it Hemitrichia circular or something like that, or whatever it was? Yeah. So the good thing about iNaturalist is you will get feedback as well too. So you will get feedback about the identification. On iNaturalist. So I believe local government authorities are also hitting up iNaturalist to get species lists of their various sites. So the work you do on iNaturalist will be meaningful work and will end up being utilized very well. So if you don't want to be a specimen collector and be bothered with the dryer and all that sort of stuff, just go out and take photos with the iNaturalist and use the iNaturalist app, either on your phone or online, and start putting dots on the map. It's that easy. It's great too, if you, as you saw with that specimen, to have a voucher specimen, so that if it is something that is of mycological interest, we can actually track down the physical record at a herbarium, and it can be physically examined and scrutinized. But again, there's stuff in the field which we can identify the species very easily, target species like Marasmius, Cymatoderma elegans, and something like Cymatoderma elegans or some other easy to identify species. You wouldn't need to take a record of those. You just take the photos and you easily identify the species and upload it. So that's Cymatoderma elegans there. And I think you've all seen the leather goblet. You probably have all seen the leather goblet in the field, and you can't really mistake that for anything else. So if you found that in the field, take some pictures, upload it to iNaturalist. It's Cymatoderma elegans, and you're done. No record is required, no physical record. Just quickly, I was just talking online about when you would just use iNaturalist and you wouldn't make a collection. So there are some terrific things called target species that are easy to identify in the field. And one of them would be this. This is Cymatoderma elegans. Has everyone seen Cymatoderma? Yeah, we've got one here. They call it the leather goblet. So you can identify that one to species in the field just from looking at it. It's really easy. It's hard to mistake. It's one of those few. And so I think FungiMap from the outset, they identified target species, which you can easily identify in the field. 2 species are just from macroscopic features. So for those ones, you probably wouldn't need to make a collection. Just photograph it, upload it to iNaturalist, and put a dot on the map. And that's great information. And that's a really terrific contribution to citizen science. Those dots on the maps, that's what we're about at the end of the day. They help us assert the conservation status of species. So Warwick's talking about actually extracting information from iNaturalist. I'm not sure if that, he's asking if you had an interest in a site and you wanted to get a list of species for the site, what would be the protocol for doing that? Would you do it through iNaturalist? I think iNaturalist is the repository for information, but I know that from work that we've done previously that if you wanted a species list for any area, you go to the DES website, the Department of Environment and Science, and you search for the term species list, and you can put in 2 lat-long coordinates, this one and this one, and it'll put a box around those 2 lat-long coordinates, and it'll give you a list of known species from that area. So if you want a species list from an area you have an interest in, go to the Department of Environment and Science and either type in an area, a park, or give 2 lat-longs. I think the lat-long, you can't drill into a really small space, unfortunately. But that's how you would get a species list if you were starting to, and then you could, and that's an interesting thing to do. Once you've got a species list for a place, you can go, oh, okay, well, these have all been identified previously. And if you find something that's not on that list, straight away you could say, oh, I could add to this list for this area. So that would be a great thing to do. Back to Fran now. So Fran's talking about the workbooks that we have all before us, and she's going to bring some of those up north to people if you are doing any workshops with her up there. Yes, it is different on the computer as the phone app. The phone app is much simpler, but the desktop version is, I think, easier to navigate. And fungi in det means a fungi of indeterminate origin. So yeah, fungi in det means I don't know its name. So that's the official term we use for something we do not know the name of. So you can lodge a record, which is fungi in det, and that means I don't know what it is, but it's a record anyway. And then subsequently work would be done on that to try and put it in a genus or a group so that it could then meaningfully be filed away in an appropriate category in the herbarium. So Fran's just talking about data sheets. And I think I showed you a record that I have here. You'll see it's accompanied by an A4 sheet of paper, which has photos on it. It also has data on the sheet. And it's just the same sort of data you'd put on iNaturalist. It's location, substrate, the habitat, was it a rainforest, was it sclerophyll, etc. Was it a eucalyptus forest? A description of the specimen. It doesn't have to be elaborate or technical language. It can just be ordinary language. And that's what accompanies your specimen to go into the herbarium. So Fran's just addressing the group now about the various specimens they've brought in and going through the data sheets. So might be some radio silence for a while, but I'll happy to answer any questions that you have if you type them in the chat sidebar. So yes, so in this little bag of tricks, which I'm calling a scientific record, there is a data sheet. In fact, I'll pull it apart for you. So there's the data sheet. This is the specimen, and you'll see it's in a smaller bag with a couple of bits of silica gel in it. Now, if I'm really lucky, I've done a spore print, and of course the spore print will go in this bag with it. So spore print, specimen, silica gel, and then data sheet. Notice they're all numbered. This is numbered. This one's numbered. The number tag goes in with the specimen. It's very important to keep everything numbered so we don't contaminate or confuse or mix up specimens. So the question is it okay to use hairspray on the spore print to fix it? I would suggest no. So we just want the material to be as clean and as uncontaminated as possible. So if you're using hairspray on the spore print, then keep in mind that the spore print, the objective is to transfer the spores to a sheet of glass that will go under a microscope. So we really just want loose spores on either a piece of paper or a piece of acetate or a small glass slide, because the idea is to transfer the spores to a glass slide and then add some medium so that we can observe the spores under a microscope. So for that to occur, we want the spores to be clean and loose and not fixed. So my spore prints will go into their own little bag. So this is my set of bags. And inside the big sheet where I keep the paper it's like Russian dolls. There's a big sheet, and inside that there's a smaller sheet. And then inside that is the specimen and another sheet again. And this tiny little sheet contains a little piece of acetate with a spore print on. And these are all blank, but that's it there. So that's a little piece of acetate. So you can use white paper, you can use brown paper. You could use a piece of glass that's in a case. Pardon me. But then of course I don't want spores all over everything else. So I put this spore print then into this little bag and seal it up. And of course the spore print sheet has been marked with the number as well too. So everything is numbered. And then it all goes together. And we're good to go. So Fran's just going through the various specimens that people have brought in, and she's talking about describing the fungi. So what you do on the data sheet is, I guess if you've taken enough images, there's not such a heavy onus on describing it, but it's a good process to go through. So when you're talking about describing the fungus, we're not scientifically describing it, because scientifically describing something is giving it a name, but we're just physically describing it. So we're talking about how long it was, how wide the cap was, whether or not the cap was smooth or scaly or tufty. And don't forget, you can use ordinary language here. You don't have to use the technical terms like, say, asbestos or squamulus. If you do use those terms, they are good to use. But until you learn what the terms mean, just plain language is fine. So just saying that something was had remnants on the cap or was smooth. And don't forget things like if it had a smell, or if when you cut it bruised. That's all good descriptive stuff. How long it was, how wide the stipe is, etc., etc. So I have a question, and it's, is the pattern of the spore print important for the ID? No, an important element for the spore print though is the color. In fact, we have a field guide here that divides up things into different, it's divided up by spore print color. So that's a really important element of taking a spore print. So not about doing mycology so much, about microscopy so much, but just ascertaining the color of the spore print. Straight away, if something had a pink spore print, I could tell you, well, it's definitely going to be Antiloma. So straight away, I could tell you that it's this particular genus. And there would be a few exceptions to that, but I'm pretty confident that if you had a pink spore print, you're looking at Antiloma. And if it's a white spore print, we can narrow down the genus straight away. If it's a black spore print, it could be a purple spore print. It could be a green spore print. So the spore print's important, and the color of the spore print is more important than the pattern of it. And then, of course, we have beautifully viable spores that are ready for a further examination under a microscope. That's why I do my spore prints on acetate, which is actually a sheet of clear plastic. I can then take that piece of acetate and throw it across the color chart and objectively identify the color. So some people might call something cream, some people might call something gold. If I take my spore print on acetate and drag it over a color chart, I can actually give it a number. I can say it's 24 brick red according to my color chart. We have some color charts here, and the color charts are designed for use with fungi by the British, the Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh. They designed in fact, I'll go and get one. So this is a color chart. And we have these for about $7.50. We get them from the Royal Botanical Gardens at Edinburgh. And what I will do is I'll get my acetate spore print and I'll just drag it across the color chart and wait for it to disappear. And when it disappears, I know, okay, it's 44 coral. And so on my data sheet, I say the spore print color is 44 coral according to the Royal British Flora of Fungi color chart. And that's an important process to follow up with a spore print, determining the color. If you don't have a color chart, just tell us what you think. It's usually white, pink, black, brown, orange, and that's good information. So that's an important part of doing the spore print, is getting the color. So I'm going to see if I have some of this information so I can share it with you. I think I do. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I don't have anything relevant to what Fran's talking about, but I'll try and find something and get it all to you later on. So I guess what we're talking about here is this sort of thing. We're talking about describing our specimens. So we might talk about naming a type of gill attachment. So for this specimen here, I would say the gills are free. And so we have a little list of gill attachments here. So we've got free, add next, adnate with a tooth, decurrent, arcuate, sinuate, attached to a collar. So there's all sorts of gill attachments. So for this one, I would say the gills are free, because you see there's a gap there between the gills and the stipe. Whereas this one, I would say they're adnext, which is this one here, because the gills attached and they are right up next to the stipe. So they add next to the stipe. This one I would say is sinuate. And again, if you want to get a good idea of the way the gills attach, taking a cross section of them will get you there, because you see these images are like a cross section. So sinuate just means like an S, and you'll see this one has the S, like a little S, goes down, then up, then down again. So I would call this one sinuate, gills attach in a sinuate fashion. So, and again, if you've taken really good photos, there's less onus on actually textually describing your specimen, but it's a good idea to go through, because you can talk about your specimens to someone and say, you know, they had sinuate gills, or they had the gills were adnext, or the gills were free, and that's interesting. Interestingly enough, in this image, you might also see that you get a kind of an idea about the spore color here. Incidentally, this one you might see has pink spores. But it's a Pluteus, which is not an entoloma. It's one of the rare ones which has pink spores but wouldn't be an entoloma. So that's interesting enough. And these are what I would call decurrent gills. Now, decurrent means they run, they curve, they start to travel down the stipe. So that's what decurrent is. They go down the stipe. They don't finish neatly up with the cap. They keep going down the length of that stipe or stem. These ones are what we call arcuate. Arcuate are just like they just curl around like an arc. So again, if you took a cross section of this is Omphalodus nidiformis, I'd call those arcuate gills. This one is this is Septotrama, a Spratter, and it's what I'd call adnate. And you'll see that the gills just travel across and just bang straight into the stipe. Adnate, just like that here. Attached to a collar, that's a strange little description there. That's what you'll find with a lot of Marasmia species. There, you'll see there they have a little collar, so the gills attached to a collar and they don't quite make it to the stipe. And now Pileus is the cap. So you might want to be describing the surface of the cap, and that's the next thing you would do. So if you're wondering what you would call this, you would call this plicate. So this is a plicate cap, whereas something like this would be described as smooth. And then we have things like the Bolitellus, and you would call them, I would say that has woolly scales. And again, if you don't know terminology, that you don't think the specific terminology, just use plain language. You could just say that it looks like it's tufted and woolly, and that would be fine. If I was going to call this cap something, I would say that it has small scales and it's hygrophanous. Now, hygrophanous is what happens to your dish rags. It basically means they look one color wet and a different color dry. And that's what hygrophanous means. They absorb water and they change color. So you'll see the inside of this cap is wet and darker, and the outside is dry. So when you dry that specimen, you'll find out that wetness, that dark brownness, just dries out and the whole thing has a homogeneous color. That's what we call hygrophanous, that it basically is darker when it's wet and lighter when it's dry. This cap I would call scurfy, because it's got little scurfy bits, but you could just say that it had cap remnants on the top. And again, the picture tells 1,000 words. So if you've taken a lot of really good images, then you don't need that. I think a lot of older specimens that were found in herbariums didn't have any images whatsoever. So there was a really heavy onus on getting a really good description with absolutely correct terminology used. We're not in that situation anymore, but it's still good to use the terminology, and it's good for you to be able to describe something. This one, Leucocapronus birnbaumii, I would say that it's plicate and striate. Plicate means it has folds in it, and striate, stripy. You could say there are little remnants or warts on it as well too. This one, I would call densely scaly. And this, I would probably say is smooth. This bolete here, slightly volutinous or chamois. And this one here, this old man of the woods, this is a Strobolomyces. I would say that was scaly. This bolete, squarose scales. Again, you might just want to say it has small dots on the cap. That's perfectly fine terminology. This one I would say is smooth with a striate edge. So it's pretty much smooth, but you'll see there's small lines here on the edge of the cap. So I would call that a striate edge. This one, extreme shagginess. And again, this one I would say is felty with appendiculate margin. That just means there are remnants hanging over the margin here. This cap I would say is smooth, splitting with a striate margin. So it's smooth, it's splitting, and that's a striate margin on the end there. So we have a lot of these examples here, and they're all very useful. Squarose scales. This one I would call umbinate, which means belly button-like, and it has powdery scales and a striate margin. This one would be minutely pubescent. It has tiny little hairs there, and volutinous. This is a Septotrama again. I'd say it has tufted hairs. This lovely looking Amanita pyramidifera, I would say has warty scales. And again, warty scales. This one is densely villose with some oppressed. That means they're pressed down. This would be smooth, possibly glutinous with striations. And this is plicate, striate and translucent. This would be plicate, striate, translucent. And this would be remose with warty ornamentation. I think, Fran, do you know what remose means? R-I-M-O-S-E? Yeah, does that mean it's, yeah, so remose means cracking, and that's what you're getting here, this crack around the wheel. That's a remose cap. Sorry? That's correct, yeah. This cap we would call glutinous because it's sticky. And this one we would call smooth to slightly roughened. This cap, I would say, has vela remnants on a smooth cap, and so on and so forth. Squarro scales, rugulose or rugose. Yep, I'm just trying to give them examples of what you're going through in the workbook. So Fran's going through descriptions. She's talking about, so you're talking about describing caps and gill attachments and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's a good thing to do, is just work through your specimen, and they're all working through their various specimens trying to describe them. This one has larger vela remnants forming scales. And this one is incurved, smooth and incised. There's the incised part, and incurved because it curls around and it's smooth. So describing the cap and the stipe and that, it's important stuff. So plicate just means, if you can imagine, plicate means if you imagine you folded something back and forth. So it looks like it would fold up back and forth. Imagine you were folding a ribbon and you just folded it one way, then the other way, then one way, then the other way, and then you stretched it out, and it would have that zigzag pattern on the ribbon. That's what plicate means. So again, if I try and show you an example of plicate, I think the first one was the best example of plicate. And that's what we call plicate. So you can see it's like it was folded up and then it unfolds and it has those neat folds. That's what we call plicate. And there's actually a genus called Plicatellus, and which is possibly what this might be, Plicatellus. And in the genus Plicatellus, they're all plicate. They had that, like they've been folded like a nice tablecloth around the edge. Now, if you're after a field knife, you can get them online. This one, the brand name is Oppanel, O-P-I-N-E-L. So Oppanel is the brand name, and in my books, this is the perfect field knife. It's actually designed for culinary mushroom hunting, and the French people designed it. It's got some boar hairs here, so you can clean up your specimen, clean up all the debris, and this nice fold-out knife, which has a safety thing on it as well too. And you'll see it's a little bit curved, so it's absolutely perfect for mushroom hunting. And Oppanel, and you get them online. So if you go through the various knives, they have a one which is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the mushroom one, and it's the Oppanel mushroom knife. Now, if you're in Brisbane, there are suppliers, and I think it's Urban Outfitters have a place in the valley, and they sell Oppanel knives, probably looking around $30 or $40 for a knife, but they're a great little thing to have in the field. And I just found this one's beauty. They really thought about it well. It also has a little hole in the end, and that's a great thing to utilize. So put some string, carry it around your neck, means you won't leave it out in the field. I've lost one already, so it's a bit of an expensive process to lose your nice, beautiful $50 knives out in the field. So it's not a bad idea to throw a string around them and carry them around your neck. So we don't usually sell the knives, but we know where to get them from. But we have a lot of other stuff too. So in your kit, I guess what you're going to need, if you are going to be processing specimens, you probably want a dryer. I've got quite a nice dryer that I can control the temperature and the time. So I would go out in the field, collect my specimen, take my lovely images with the numbers in. I'd bring them all home. I'd put the specimens on the dryer. I'd also then put the silica gel with the specimen on the dryer. We do supply silica gel, but it's not that hard to get hold of yourself. So you'll see there's some silica gel. It's what you find in packets of stuff to keep things dry. Now, silica gel expires and expires very easily, so it absorbs moisture. So what I find that when I store my silica gel, by the time I've come to use it, it's really no good, but it does refresh very easily. So what you do is when you're drying your specimen, you put the silica gel with the specimen on the dryer. That silica gel will refresh and become nice and crisp and dry again, and then you pack it away with your specimen. So get home, do a spore print, throw my specimen on the dryer, and then bring it all together with my data sheet, and then I'm done. And of course, you're going to need some sandwich bags, and this really is the one time I am happy to buy plastic, because I do want this to last forever, because this will go into the herbarium and it will be the what embodies the specimen, what the specimen will be stored in. So it's the one time I'm happy for plastic to last forever, because we do want these records to last forever in the herbarium. So everyone's just working through their specimens. And about not, I guess if you really want to take this to the next level, it's not just about taking the photos and putting the data sheet together and the specimen in the bag. You might want to write a little story. So a really good blurb about field notes. So some really good field notes, and it could just be ordinary language. You can say, and it's funny, if you tell a little story, you could provide information that you didn't know was useful. So you might say, oh, we went out to a national park and it was, 3 days after a significant rain event. And right there and there you say, oh, okay, that's actually very good information to say that it was after a rain event, or that it was actually, there was no rain recently, it was dry. And on the day it was about 24 degrees and overcast. And we went up to this altitude in the rainforest and we found these specimens. They were about 3 meters away from a eucalyptus tree. It was a recently cleared area, or it was a recently burned area, or it was dense in the rainforest, or it was adjacent to a creek. Or you might say it was in a melaleuca forest underneath melaleuca trees. So you see that all that information that you provide there in that sort of general description could lend itself to us understanding the role it's playing. It might be a recycling fungi that's breaking down timber that's dead, or it could be a mycorrhizal fungi that's living in symbiosis with trees. And when you provide that description of its situation and where it was found and how it was found, you might inadvertently be able to provide evidence that the mycological detectives could use to determine what sort of role it's playing, and that will help with ID. It might be an endophyte, it might be a mycorrhizal symbiont fungi, it might be a recycler, or it could be a parasitic fungi. You might say that, it was found all over a tree and the tree was dead and it was erupting out of the tree. So we're like, oh, okay, maybe it was a parasite that killed the tree, parasitic fungi. So that's all important information. So good field notes and writing a little story along is a great thing to do. I'm guilty. I don't do all that stuff. I just really take the photos. Yeah, plicate means concertina. So it's like a concertina. So I just usually take on my photos because I try and get volume of specimens into the herbarium. But you could really, and I know that irks Nigel, because he'd rather have one specimen with great images and amazing field notes and a really good story behind it, rather than 10 specimens with very little information. So the accompanying information for your specimen is absolutely critical. And if you can really work on that, that will make that book that you put in the library a really good book, rather than a really sparsely illustrated or poorly described book. So obviously, the more time you spend on your specimens and the more description, the more energy you put in describing them, the better the result for the herbarium and the better the information. So I might go through the data sheet with you. Because I understand that's what you'll be completing. So I'll show you what I actually put on a, so I just have this blank. Is making sketches really necessary if you take photographs? Not really, but I tell you what, when you make a sketch of the fungi, you really absorb its DNA. You really clearly understand how the gills are attached and what the cap looks like. You get a really good understanding of it's like you're immersing yourself into the fungus. So if you really want to understand something, then it's like, I guess, if you want to learn something, the best way to learn about something is to teach it to other people. And if you want to really understand a fungus, draw it, take a cross section of it, do a nice botanical illustration of it, and you really get to understand, how the gills attach, whether it's densely gilled or not. And sometimes too, when we look at the gills underneath, they'll be all the way attached, or there'll be one attached, one middle, one short one, and you'll get that. You'll start to. It's like you're being more intimate with your specimen, so it's a good process to go through. It can be a fun thing to do too if you're a bit artsy and crafty. So it's not a bad thing to do. And I was going to show you the specimen sheet. So here's my specimen sheet. So when I collect a specimen, I say, species name, fungi in det. There. Now, if I do have a name, such as Rosmius lucidus, remember the proper protocol is all italics, only the genus has a capital, the species name is all in lowercase, and then I want to say, where did that come from? So I would say it's a field ID by Frangard. So it's a good idea to say who provided the ID in the field, or you might then come along and say lab ID confirmed by Nigel Bechner. So you can update these sheets later on. So maybe later on, when Nigel looks at the specimen in the lab, he will confirm the lab ID. So with regards to identifications, there's a field ID and there's a lab ID. The field ID is just a hunch out in the field, and that gives us a way to follow up. And if we think it's Russell or if we think it's Erasmus, then we take it back, we do some lab work, and then we give it a lab ID after we confirm that. Now the location is, national park name, and then of course I have the substrate. Substrate can be soil, it can be wood, log, 50 centimeters diameter, could be twig, 5 millimeters diameter, it could be horse poo, and so on and so forth, just what it's growing out of. Now the habitat is where it's growing. So I would put rainforest, you could say, eucalyptus, forest, wetlands. And again, I'm not that great with habitats, but I've learned to identify various habitats. So it could be sclerophyll or wet sclerophyll. Now sclerophyll is basically a eucalyptus forest. Wet sclerophyll is a same thing, but wetter. Plant community, if you know it, otherwise not known. The landform, you might say it was a a riverbank. Now remember, you don't have to go to town with too much detail, but the more information you can provide, the better, and the more interesting the book we put in the library. Description. So this is where you could put cap 20 to 30 centimeters wide. That would be a very big specimen. You could say it was plicate, etc. And that's what everyone's working on now, describing the cap like we did before, like I went through those images, and describing the stipe. You would talk about the length of stipe, width of stipe, and so on and so forth. And again, if you have a lot of images with scale in them, there isn't a heavy onus on that, but it is a good thing to do. Spore print, pink, black, white. So you want the spore color there. And again, with those color charts, I might say more specifically, it is, and I'll give you a look at this. I realize I'm not showing my screen, am I? So this is the information I've been typing in now. So this is my data sheet, I beg your pardon. So again, the species name up here, the location, the substrate, habitat, the plant community, the landform, the description, spore print, any notes I might want to provide. You might want to talk about bruising, bruised blue when dissected, etc., etc. Collection date is important, and here's your lat long, etc., etc. And then, of course, what I do is I just get my images, and I drag them back over and put them on the sheet. Boom. So there's my data sheet with all of the information and the images, and we're done. And again, so when I'm talking about spore print, I can actually say that it was, sorry, I realize you're just looking at me then when I was typing all that. I might say it was 12 fulvus, which on the color chart would be that. So if I was doing that, I would say spore print 12 fulvus, and then I would say Edinburgh color chart. Another important thing to do is when you use your GPS down here, you have to say the codec where you got it from. So for me, it's the codec is Google Location Services because I have a Google phone, or you might say from Google Maps, and that just gives context to the GPS coordinates. So that's right. And again, the more love you put into your specimen and the length of time and you invest, the better the record. But for me, I don't put a lot of time into collecting specimens. I throw them on the dryer, pull up my data sheet, throw the images on, put the GPS on, bada bing, bada boom, throw it all in a bag and I'm done. So for me, it's not a lot of work. And that means they're probably not brilliant in terms of being records, but we're really needing to just get stuff in the herbarium. So the critical information, obviously, is the location, the images, and then just drying the specimen in a bag. But if you really want to be detailed and loving, then you could go to town with descriptions and maybe doing a drawing. And I guess if you're specializing in a species or in a group of fungi, then that's the sort of thing which will become a labor of love, something you might actually enjoy doing. Don't forget too that when you create this record, once I've done this, I've basically created a page of a book. So I could then throw that into a field guide. So once I have proper IDs and descriptions on that sheet could potentially become one page of a field guide that I could put together and that I could publish later on. So I call them books that go into a library, but they actually are pages that could form a book. You could literally, as you go through this process, page by page, create a field guide that you could then publish. So that's not a bad thing to do later on. So, and as you would have seen, I've collected around 934 specimens. So tomorrow, if I wanted to, if I put enough love into each of those pages, I could put all 934 pages together and call it a field guide, and then I'd be published. So that's an interesting end game to play. And if you take that perspective with each page that you create, it's not a bad thing to do. You could maybe do a small field guide for a local park in your area and hand it over to council and say, this is a field guide for, you know, Ben Bennett Park in Caloundra. These are all my observations that I've made. And then each one of those pages is a very important page of a very important document. So everyone's just working through their specimens. All right, I'm going to take a break and I'll be back in a few minutes. Again, type your questions on the side there if you want. And again, yeah, I understand it's a lot of work to be making records and processing them. It is a lot of work, but if you don't want to do all that body of work, iNaturalist might be the way to go. So if you don't have the wherewithal to get yourself a dryer and some silica gel and bags and produce scientific records, then get on the iNaturalist app and just upload your photos to iNaturalist. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. And a really great thing a great contribution to the body of science. Dots on maps is what we're about. All right, I'll be back in a moment. Type away questions if anyone's got anything to ask. what is expected? So I've got a question from Linda, and she said, could you show us an example of what is expected for a sketch? So in terms of a sketch, we're talking about, so in the same way that I showed you that photograph where you get all of the information about the specimen. So it's really that sort of information. So where am I? I'm going to share my screen again. So this guideline, it's something, I guess I got frustrated because again and again online, people would put up images of a cap of a fungus and they'd say, ID please. So this was basically a voice of frustration to say, this is what we need to identify a fungi from a photo. So if you were doing a drawing, this is what you would want to draw, basically. So the spore print may not be necessary to draw, but you certainly draw the specimen, the degrees of morphology in dissection. So you can see here, I'm capturing important information like the ring. I can see the ring. I'm drawing that. I'm drawing the stipe. Does it curve? Is it straight? If I can get the texture on there, that'll be good. The vulva or sock. Here on the base of the specimen, the detail around that, it might have little notches in it. It might be like a full sock. There may not be any one at all. It might be just a bulb at the base. The cap and all of the features on the cap I'm trying to capture. And this one is a specimen dissected. So in the dissection, you can see the way the gills attach, and that's important information. So that's really, I guess, what I would be after in a drawing. So what I might do as well is try and find a mycological illustration online. And here's a good example. And there it is there. So that's the sort of thing you would want to draw. So you could make very beautiful artworks, or if I can find a better example, that's the sort of thing. That's what a diagram would look like. So you'll see, I can see all of the macroscopic features. I can see the cap, the stipe, the sock. I can see, you know, a dissection of the specimen. So we're basically trying to communicate as much information as we can. Interestingly enough, this one's by Beatrix Potter. The only thing missing from that image over here would be a sense of scale. But that's the sort of thing. And if you're arty or crafty, then there's another good one that gives you an idea about. It's got the underside, a bit of the bruising on there. So that sort of thing. And I guess if you know, if you were a good artist, then this could be quite a fun thing to do as well too. There's a great illustration. So the next question I have is, should we use color as well? You don't need to, but certainly that'd be great. That would be good. I guess if you've got photos, then that may not be necessary, but yeah, why not? Why not use color if you are so inclined? And again, the more love you pour into your specimen data sheet, the better it would be as a record. I don't draw any of my specimens because I provide color imagery, color photo imagery. So I don't go to all that length. I'm really quite an unfussy collector. Like I said, I just grab the specimen, dry it. If I can be bothered, I do a spore print. Sometimes you try and get a spore print, it's unsuccessful anyway. But it's nice when you do get a spore print because you get a more comprehensive record of the specimen. If you don't get a spore print, and a mycologist later would like to look at the spores of the specimen. That means what they might have to do is pick up the dried specimen and use a pair of fine tweezers and try and tease out some material from the gills and scratch out some spores, and then they put it onto a glass slide and they just basically mash it up with some fluid, and then hopefully they'd be able to get some spores to look at under the microscope. So you can get it, you can harvest spores from a specimen without having a spore print. The difficult thing there is that sometimes spores change. So spores, like the rest of the mushrooms, start out small, they eventually grow and get ornamentation on them, and they become viable spores. And when they're viable spores, they float free from the specimen. If it's an airborne specimen, that's a basidiomycete that just drops spores into the air. And you know that then if you get a spore print, these are fully formed viable spores. Now, if I haven't got a spore print and I have to tease them out of the specimen, I may get young spores that don't have their proper ornamentation, and they may not be fully formed. So it could be frustrating for someone who was working on the specimen if they had to tease spores out of it, but too often we're in that situation. So a spore print is gold, not just because we know the spores are viable, but also because we can obtain spore color as well too. It can be difficult just to determine spore color before doing a spore print, but sometimes you do get insight into it. So if I give you an example, like I said, entelomas all have pink spores. Now, if you have a look at this picture here, I haven't done a spore print. I'll just make, I'm not sharing my screen. I have to share my screen again, sorry. So this enteloma here, I know, because I know enteloma, not that well, but I understand they all have pink spores. Now, if you have a look here at the image, you will get a hint of that. See that pink color there on the gills? So I could say, without doing a spore print, that it has pink gills, because you can usually see the spores falling on the gill, or sometimes they'll fall down the stipe, and you can get a sense of the spore color. And I guess for Cortinarius, if you thought something was a Cortinarius, there's two things you'd look for. Does it have a cortina? Now, a cortina is the Latin word for web, and a cortina starts out like this. You see, it's like a web-like structure over the underside of the fungus, over the gills, and then that web-like structure breaks in the way that a stocking might break, and then what you get is a cortina remnant here, and that's a cortina remnant, is what we call that. Now, quite often, the spores that fall will catch on the cortina remnant. So for something like Cortinarius, an important feature is that they have rust-colored spores. So I think this is a Cortinarius because I can see a cortina remnant or a web remnant, and it also has rust-colored spores that have fallen down and caught on the cortina remnant. So straight away I've got, it's definitely a Cortinarius because it has a cortina and rust-colored spores. So just from those two observations, I can give this a genus. And yeah, that's good information. So I understand it's a lot of information to absorb when you get into specimen collecting. But all of the information aside, it's really just about, again, don't get too stressed out about how much effort you need to put into collecting a specimen. It really is just collecting it, drying it, throwing it into a bag, and some data is good. And then, of course, if you really want to love your specimen, you'll do that very well. Dry it well, you'll get a spore print, you'll get a lot of data, you'll write a little story about the field notes, what it smelt like out in the field, its situation, what it was growing near. But don't be too stressed out if you don't have all of that information. And again, take lots of photos, and that'll alleviate the burden of having to do all that textual work around describing. So lots of photos and good data. So I might show you an example of what I would call maybe a good collection, a good record. So these are all my data sheets that I'm going through. And you'll see I've got a lot of stuff here that's fungi and debt. All right. So here's a specimen I collected, specimen 779. It was a QMS official 4A. There's my permit numbers there. So I'm demonstrating it's a legal collection. Fungi and debt bolete. Yep. So I call it fungi and debt because I don't know what it is. But I do know which morpho group to put it in. I know it's a bolete, so I've called it a bolete. And I know it's a bolete because it has pores underneath. So again, it's not named, and I'm not too worried about that. I've got the location, I've got the substrate, the habitat there, notes, no bruising after dissection. So with boletes, you always dissect the specimen, and that's what I've done here. And as you will note, there's no bruising. It didn't turn blue, it didn't turn orange, it didn't turn brown. It just stayed the same color pretty much. So I've dissected it and then taken a photo of it. So I haven't been too fussy here. And then, of course, the ever important GPS coordinates and the date. And that's it. I'll try and find another one. Another bolete I've collected. And this is my data sheet. So yeah, this is one I got from Ben Bennett. It was growing in soil. Notes with no bruising. So that's an important observation to make with boletes. You always have to dissect them. So that's what they look like. Type. You see I've got no lengthy textual descriptions in there. I've just got the GPS coordinates. There's the dissection, and then there's that all-in-one shot where I've got the scale, the dissection, and the cat, the mushroom in situ. Now, what's good about the tags that I've got is I can record pores per millimeter. Pores per millimeter is a good thing to observe. So if I was going to zoom in on that, I would say it had, oh, maybe there we go. I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 pores for every millimeter. So that's not a bad thing to do as well too when you do your dissection. So pores per millimeter is a really good thing. And I guess different morpho groups to have different information requirements. As you start collecting, you'll get a feel for what's required for different specimens. So if I was an agaric, if I was collecting agaric, now an agaric is a guild fungus. So this is the data I have around from my agaric. So you'll see it's got a split cap, and I've just taken photos of the top side and the underside. Sometimes you lose, it's hard to make out. So what I'll often do is put them on a white sheet and then take a photo. Kind of brings the specimen out some more. Maybe not a brilliant collection here. You'll see I've cut the base off. So that was a bit of a shame. A good bolete collection. So this is what I would call a really good data sheet. It's fungi. Again, there's no ID because I haven't worked through any field guides. I haven't got an identification. I don't know what it is, but I know it's a bolete. I've got the location, the soil, open area, and here's the image of the specimen. So I've got a good amount of material. I've got a sense of scale there. I've performed the dissection. And I've made a textual description here. So I've said here cap red 1 to 3 centimeters across, buff and dull when dry, and curls around slightly in younger specimens. You'll see there. Pores are adnate or adnext. Stipe is 1 centimeter wide, solid. It's a solid stipe. Either straight or J-like. See, some of them are J-like. Consistent thickness and 2 to 5 centimeters long. So the consistent thickness, it doesn't taper. Paler at the tip, then becoming darker and ochraceous towards the base. You'll see that from the imagery. They become a little bit darker, and ochraceous means ochre coloured or dark yellow down the base. And I also did a spore print. So I've taken a photo of the spore print and I've set it of the color chart. So that's the spore print sitting on top of the color chart, and I've said it's 27 hazel. So it had brown spores. And you see there I've got pores per millimeter. I've put the scale on the pores so someone can count the spores per millimeter. And so it's got a nice description, date, location, GPS data. That's what I call a good data sheet. Nice images and a well-dried specimen. So Penelope has a question about when drying several specimens in a dryer, do you need to be super careful not to intermingle the specimens, or is just drying them on different levels of the dryer enough? So drying them on different levels of the dryer is enough. Quite often what I do is I get a piece of kitchen towel and I cut it into squares, and then each specimen I place on the kitchen towel. So they kind of have their own kitchen towel base, and then I know they're not going to shed spores on something that's below them. But in the dryer, because it's a ventilated space, you generally don't get cross-contamination between the specimens. So I find though that the difficult thing is not to put like specimens next to each other. So I don't put my boletes together, because if one rolls over to the other specimen, then you've got a mixed bag all of a sudden. So I give them their own little space on each segment of the dryer by putting a bit of kitchen towel on under each one. And don't forget to put the silica gel with them in the dryer, and also the number that you used out in the field. Put the number and the silica gel, and then put them on a little piece of kitchen paper and put them on the dryer. And I'd put boletes. I'll put a bolete and an agaric, and then on the next level I'll put a different bolete and a different agaric. Just so you can't get them mixed up. It's really easy. You might walk in and bump over the dryer and everything falls out on the floor, and then you're in a hot mess trying to pick everything up and put it all back together. So just have to be very careful, I suppose. I find everyone finds their own way of making it work for them. I'm really stupid, so I dumb things down to the very nth degree. I always keep the number with the specimen, and on the dryer the number is with the specimen, and it's all on a piece of kitchen towel. And after I take my spore print too, I'll put the spore print in the dryer right at the end, just so it dries out a little bit, because the spore prints will need to be dried out before they're packed away. So I put the spore print, and the spore print also has the number on it with the appropriate specimen. $12.08. So I think Warwick's going to give a little talk soon about permits and stuff as our permit holder. So he'll have a little presentation to make, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. Testing 1, 2. Testing. My apologies if you weren't able to hear me then. So I'm going to just answer that question again. And the answer was about dryers and drying on. I put everything on the dryer in its own space. I cut up the kitchen paper towel in little squares, place the kitchen towel down on the one level, and I put the various specimens over on each section of each of their own kitchen towel. And they all have their own space. And in the dryer, because it's ventilated space, there shouldn't be cross-contamination. But if in doubt, just put them on different levels. I usually find that it's hard to process more than maybe 5 or 6 specimens. And 5 or 6 specimens in a foray for one person is a lot to do, I find. So even if you're just doing 1, that's fine. But more than 5 or 6, you're really creating a lot of work for yourself, and trying to fiddle that on your dryer can be difficult. So keep it to 5 or 6 specimens on each foray, bring them home, get spore prints, and that'll be, I reckon, you max out after 5 or 6 specimens. So sorry, we had a few technical difficulties. I just realised the speakers were dead. I don't know how many questions I've tried to answer that didn't get an answer. Let me know if you're not clear on anything. I'll be back in a moment. Oh, you're sending the money now? Yeah, that's fine. Sure. And I was just going to email you a confirmation that. That's really a reminder for me too, because I'm in charge of the bank account. So if I see money come through, I'm like, what's that for? I'll be like, oh, there it is. That's good. That's great. That's fine. I'll see it. It'll come up at the bank account. And now that I've got it, it'll pop up in my email. So I just basically email myself to say that bank transfer was magenta on that date in the email, and I'll be able to go, okay. So yeah, that's not a, it's not a, it's a good one. Yeah. So Warwick's just talking about permits for collection. Okay. So I'm just going to share my screen again. So he's just talking about the permits and that the permit numbers need to be linked to the samples. And you would have seen that on my data sheet that I had the permit number at the top of the data sheet. So here's a list of the parks, and sometimes we only have a permission to carry out collection as part of the park. So this is an example, Dagulla National Park. We can only collect in these green areas. So that we're only able to collect in certain areas may be about conflicts with native title. These are the parks in Brisbane where we are able to collect. And these are Sunshine Coast. So if you have a local park where you want to collect, just let us know, and we'll try and negotiate a permit with your local government authority. So these are the various local government authorities that have given us permission in certain areas to collect. So we just noticed that the list for Noosa, they're actually Brisbane parks, but we'll update that and correct it. If in doubt, let us know, and we'll let you know if we've got a permit or we can get one. So just email Warwick if you have an area where you want to collect in. I know some of you are further up north or further afield, and there might be a little park you want to adopt. So now's a good time to make your request. If you have a specific area you want to be on a permit. We have a question about private property. I think we already answered that earlier. And private property, if you own the property, is fine to collect on. You can go to town. So for private property, we're talking about the evidence for legal collection would be an email from the landowner saying, I give permission for John Smith to collect fungi on this day for the purposes of, making a scientific record, or just I am the property owner here and am making collections on my own property. But it needs to be documented permission from the landowner, even if it is granting yourself permission to collect. Just need to document that you are the landowner and this is from your private property, and that that then evidences it's a legal collection. Again, make sure you've got your permit with you. Just pop it in your glove box and leave it there. Although I believe it needs to be produced on hand if need be. So it's not a bad thing to have them on your phone. We have them in the cloud in Dropbox. If you need a link, let me know. Fran's just summing up a few things. So she's talking about as we make collections of specimens and identify species, that this becomes meaningful information for local government authorities, for environmental protection authorities, you know, if it's an invasive species or that sort of thing. So there are so many ways in which this data is useful and meaningful. All right. In summary, I would say that don't get overwhelmed. I know that it seems like a lot of information and it seems hard and difficult, and it might be hard. It might seem that way, but really it's not hard. And if it is too hard, just do it through iNaturalist. Go out, take photos, and as you're out in the field, as you're eating lunch, upload those photos to iNaturalist. I showed you how quickly and easy that was. It takes minutes to put dots on maps, and that's important work. But if you are inclined to become a specimen collector, it's not difficult. I don't get too fussy, and I know that being fussy is great, but I get my specimens, and I literally, like when I go out, 5 or 6 is as much as I can do in one day. That's a lot of work. So 5 or 6 specimens, I go home, I cut up some kitchen towel, I put the little sheets on the various levels of the dryer, I put my specimens with their number on the dryer, I put my silica gel with the specimen on the dryer, If I'm lucky, I've got one, a sacrificial one that I can leave out for a spore print, and I might get a spore print. And that's it. Come home, throw them on the dryer. When they're done, bag them up, put it with a data sheet, and you're done. Now, you can do it really simply, and we really love people to just do it once and start getting records into the herbarium. If you want to be really detailed and careful and loving, just remember that this is a book in the library, so the more love you put into it, the more wonderful field notes and good descriptions you put, the more lovely, good images, the better that will be as a record. And if you want to play the long game, like I've done this 935 times now. So if I had taken the time to make each one of those with beautiful descriptions and good images, maybe even microscopy images, then I'd have a book by now that I could publish. I'd have a 935-page field guide. So keep that in mind. Play the long game. Maybe you want to build a field guide for your local reserve that you could hand to your local government officer. Yeah? Make each page a page in a field guide. Take that approach. Good images about where you found it, some good field notes. If you're lucky, get to ID. Sometimes something will sit at fungi and debt for quite a long time, and it won't be till much later on that the herbarium gets back to you or someone gets back to you, and you're actually able to come back and go, scratch that out. It actually gets an ID. And then you're basically building your own field guide going forward. And then you could publish in that. You could say, this is Joan Smith's field guide to such and such reserve in Brisbane. And then that'd be a great thing to do, to produce. Yeah, then you'd have a legacy of your work that was your own, that you could be quite proud of. But all that aside, just get a record into the herbarium. It really isn't hard to do. And again, you'll start simple and you'll get it wrong, and then we'll build on that. And by the time you're getting up to 300 specimens or 935, you'll probably be doing it in a really good way because you've learned. Yeah, question? Not long. And again, textual, there was a really heavy onus on textual descriptions because a long time ago, they didn't have images with specimens. So then it was really critical for me to say it has 5 gills and it's this long and it's this wide, because you don't have pictures. Pictures tell 1,000 words. So I hate to say this because I know the more senior mycologists get mad about me saying this, but when you got great pictures, you don't even have to provide a description. but again, that's right. But again, if you want this to be a page in a field guide, go the distance with your descriptions, because that's what you would want in a field guide. Okay, so don't be fussy, but if you are fussy, then that becomes bankable stuff later on. Question 2. Go to the herbarium. There you go. Boop. You drop it at the door. That's it. You drop it at the door at the herbarium. And then that's it. So this is good to go. You can bring it to meetings. We used to have our meetings at the herbarium, and the great thing was we just leave it on the desk, and Nigel would come through and go through them all. And then what happens at the herbarium, they put them in the freezer for 2 weeks, and that kills any insects that might be in there. And then after they've been in the freezer for 2 weeks, they come out and they get curated. So he'll go through these things, and if they don't have a name on them or an ID, they sit on a big list of stuff because they can't be filed away. But if they do have a genus and he agrees with it, or a species name, then it can be filed away in the herbarium. So the question was, what then when you get this record? And it's really just delivery to the herbarium. So yeah, the end game is to drop this off at the herbarium. So you just deliver your specimen. Post it in if you need to. If you're miles away, post it into the herbarium. Who was the next question? I've answered 2. So you're number 3. The question is, what's the best way to give your images in physically? So quite often, and that's why I have the luxury of having access to a printer, a color printer. So I can print these specimen data sheets out quite quickly and add them to my specimen. For a long time though, I noticed that if I didn't do this, if I didn't put them in a Ziploc bag and actually like make them with the specimen, if they were separate, they'd just get lost. And that's fine. So you don't actually have to print out those sheets. You can actually send them in digitally to the herbarium, and that's fine. So if you don't have access to a printer to print out something, you can lodge your specimen with the herbarium and then follow it up with a digital copy of your Word document with the images on. This is more ideal, but there's no real pressure there, because I realize that's an additional hassle and additional expense, finding a printer, getting access to it, paying for color copies, and then finding out that they just get separated somewhere in the herbarium, and then they ring you and say, we lost your data sheet, could you send us another copy of it? And you just send it in anyway via email. And on that note, can I just say that when we're taking photos, don't forget, like, I mean, I'm going to show you the images that I've taken. A photo without a number in it is no good. So, my apologies. Here we go. So, here's an example. Every photo, see that tag with the number in it? Every photo should have that in. And then that photo can't be mistaken for anything else. So if that photo didn't have that in, it'd be useless. So that scale is really important. Every photo needs that number in it. It gives me the specimen number, which is WGB940, and that's the protocol for your numbers. 3 initials, 3 numbers. So you'll start at 001 for your first collection. And the nice thing is you kind of keep tabs on how many you've done. So, and it'll be, you know, AZC001, then 002. And these tags also have a sense of scale on them. So I've got a sense of scale, I've got a number. So that's the important thing. And then that photo, I know which specimen it belongs to always, because it's got the specimen number in it. So that's the important thing. Sorry? Now I realise I've underestimated myself, and I need to expand the numbers. So that's fine. I'll just go to 4 digits. Good question. So the question was, what is a good collection, and when do I make a good collection? And you know, it's funny, I had that question to start with. I remember Megan Prance was talking about stuff, and I said, surely no one would collect bloody Pictoporus. It's everywhere. The herbarium must be full of it. And do you know what her answer was? And again, so answering this question's about having your finger on the pulse of mycology. And she said, well, Pictoporus, those little orange brackets, she said they're very common, but there's someone doing work on them right now, and they want collections, and they want collections with have information about the substrate, because I want to know if it's on different substrates, does it change the organism? And in the end, it turned out that one thing we were calling Pictoporus cochineus wasn't just one species. So the work that person did, she got all the collections in. It turns out that one orange bracket we call Pictoporus cochineus is probably going to be more like 12 or 15 different species. So it is important to collect that sort of thing. So again, I always start on Facebook. So at the end of my day, first thing I do is I just throw everything up on Facebook and say, hey, great day out. And you know, then you'll hear the oohs and ahs, or, oh, sometimes someone will weigh in, they'll say, oh, was a collection made of that because, you know, someone's doing work. So again, you get a feel for this as you go forward. People are doing, if it's marasmias, Fran's doing work on marasmias. So throw it up on Facebook. We'll have a chat about it. And anything you find, I would suggest anything you find, if you can make a good collection with a good array of morpho groups, collect it. Without knowing if it's a good or bad collection, just collect it. It will never be wasted. So let's say you collected a bunch of chlorophyllum molybdites. The herbarium is probably full of it, but you know what? It would probably come back to a workshop and we'd use it for something else. So it would still be a good, meaningful collection, and it would still be a dot on the map with, you know, species and who knows? Maybe someone is going to start doing work on chlorophyllum. And all of a sudden they'll say, well, I wish we had more collections of chlorophyllum molybdites. All the people would probably tell you it'd be a waste of time to collect that, but now someone's doing some work on it because it has very interesting chemical property. So there's all that sort of conversation. Is all of a sudden someone will start doing some work and they'll be like, they have to put out the call. We want collections of this, and it's because there's no work done to build the library. The library's empty, so we just need to fill the library. So is it a good collection? Collect it. So Fran's just showing the dots on the maps on the ALA of plant species, which are numerous. And by contrast, she shows the dots on the maps of fungi, and it's very, very sparse. So again, it's just giving you the idea of how empty the library is and how much more we need to do. So also, as you go forward too, like, I always get that feeling like if I find something in the field, because I've been doing this for, and the longer you do it, the more you'll know. The good feeling is I've never seen this before. Yeah. So if I'm like, I've never seen this before, I get a little tingle, and I'm like, oh, if you've never seen it before, collect it. Yeah. If you've seen it everywhere and you've already collected it, maybe just take some photos. I've collected this before here. It's up again. But the thing is, like, if you collect Pictoporus somewhere and you made a collection, and then you see it every year again in February, each time do an iNaturalist record, because we want that. We don't just want that one dot at that one time. We want to know every February it's here again. It's here again. It's a new record every time with a different date on it. And that's important. So you probably collect the first time, and then once you've identified it, you'd be like, I know what this is now. I don't need to collect it anymore. There is a physical specimen in the herbarium, but it's appearing again and again and again. And what we're getting our head around now is negative records. So if we found something somewhere and we go back the next year at the same time and it's not there, we're now working on the fact that we might need to call negative records. So it was here and now it's not here, and now it's not here, and now it's not here. And then for 10 years, it's never been back. So we're getting our head around collecting how we're going to collect negative records, but that's important information. So that's that feeling. If you haven't seen it before, get excited because it might be interesting. And you'll find out quickly too, if you put it on Facebook, people will go, oh yeah, that's this, or that's that, or oh, that's interesting. You'll find out very quickly what's interesting. When you make a collection, how is the description set out? So I'm putting up on the screen an example of what I think was a good collection and a good data sheet. So you'll see I've taken images of this bolete. Nice pictures. There's a number in every picture. I've done a dissection. Really good images. I've got the color of the spore print. I took a photo of the color chart. The spore print was brown. It was 12 fulvus. And then up on the data sheet, I've actually for one of the first times in my life, actually went to the description. So this is what I wrote. I said it was buff terracotta coloured cap. It had subdecurrent pore surface and which was rosaceous. 6 to 8 centimeters stipe length. The stipe was 1 to 1.5 centimeters wide under the cap and tapers thinner at the base and is also terracotta colour with a wood grain-like appearance and hollow. Not cyaspitose, but did clump in 2 to 3 specimens. So cyaspitose is what they use in the grass ID terminology. It means tufted. And cyaspitose is when there's a lot of them coming out of like a source. Yeah, cyaspitose. So again, don't get caught up on the terminology. You can just say it was in a clumped, or I said was not cyaspitose, but did clump in 2 to 3 specimens, with some occurring in singular fashion. Appears to be saprophytic based on occurrence. Saprophytic means it's a recycler as opposed to a symbiotic, like a mycorrhizal symbiont. Last flush was in an open area, a fire trail, 3 to 4 meters away from trees, 1 to 2 pores per millimeter. That's it. And I could get all that from images, but there's stuff in there that wasn't in the images about how far away it was from trees and that it was a fire trail. All that sort of stuff. So those field notes and descriptions are really important. And that's what I would call a reasonably good field note description sort of blurb. And that's the end game. That's where you want to be, with the GPS coordinates and some nice images, a spore print, yeah, all packed away in here. So I was just showing them online what we had. And this is it. So I've got, it's like Russian dolls. I've got a big bag in which the paperwork goes. Then I've got a smaller bag that the specimen goes in, and then inside that I've got another bag, and inside that I've got an acetate sheet on which I do my spore prints. You can use paper, you can white paper or black paper. I use acetate for my spore prints because they bend and you can touch them to a glass slide to transfer them, and they're also easier to identify the color. I can drag this, I get a nice spore print on this, and then I can just drag it across my color chart until it disappears. And that kind of takes the subjectivity away from spore color. You might call it brick orange or something. I might call it brown. But when I drag it across here and it disappears over that one, I'm like, okay, it's 15 brick according to this color chart. So, and that's what it is. And then you got your spore print in your bag, specimen with silica, and then specimen sheet in the big bag, and keep it all together and then drop it at the herbarium. Question? Eckersley's Art Shop, acetate. It's like stuff they put on an overhead projector. Again, so people work, and when you go into the herbarium and you do some volunteer work and you actually work on pulling out specimens and then trying to observe them under the microscope, you'll find out what is a good collection methodology then, because you're like, well, now I have to get this spore print onto a slide. And I'm finding that because it's on paper, I just get paper shards all over my microscope slide, and it pollutes my slide. Fran likes to do her spore prints on glass slides, and that's a really good way too. So, question? Because of COVID, it's currently shut down. It's really just about contacting the herbarium, making yourself available. And you can go up there and you really just, it's doing admin work, filing away specimens, or you might even be able to sit down with some fungi and debt stuff and try and work out what it is. And that's a bit more advanced volunteer work, and then you might be able to file something away. So you might be able to do some microscopy if you're lucky, but to start with, it'll probably be just boxing things up and putting things away, really helping an under-resourced institution resource itself properly to get stuff into a library. Right, so volunteer is open at the Herbarium again. So you just need to contact the Herbarium and avail yourself. So let them know you're from the QMS and that you would like to be available. And Judith was going down once a week and Fran was going down once a week, weren't you? Yeah, and it's a great thing to do. You just go in there and you go upstairs. It's really interesting to see where your specimens end up. You're just walking down corridors and corridors and corridors of these boxes, and you know, you can pull out old specimens and have a look at them. It's quite fun. When do we do the 4A? So the 4A schedule is being constructed as we speak, and again, it'll be a broadcast email like we do for this meeting. We're saying we're having a 4A. With national parks, we have to limit the numbers to 15, so it's first in, best dressed. If it's not a national park, we can have a lot more, but of course, a good 4A is a small 4A. If there's only 5 or 6 people, it's a bit less like herding cats, but it will be an email to you and it'll be a notification, and we just respond then. So it'll be once a month. The first one will be in February. We do them up the coast, we do them down the coast, we do them at the hinterland, and here in Brisbane. So we'll let you know the 4A schedule. And again, the website will be updated in due course about what we're doing and when. That's going on a 4A, yeah. That'll round out this knowledge. When you're actually on the ground in the field, you'll see how we tease a specimen out of the ground, how we lay it out and cut it up and photograph it, and then how we store it and bring it back and process it. It'll just answer those little questions about, oh, I wasn't quite sure about that, but now I can see how you do it. So if you actually come on a 4A with us, it'll be good. It just gives you the physical knowledge to bring all this together. You can buy silica gel. Now, I hate to say it, but it's really the responsibility of the herbarium to supply all of this stuff to us. I guess the real problem is that they could supply, you know, tons of silica gel to everyone, and then we still only have 5 specimen collectors. So what happened with me is I started to demonstrate that I was a regular and meaningful specimen collector. And then all of a sudden it was like the purse strings opened, and Megan Prance was there at the time, and she was, every time I came, she'd be like, here's bags, here's silica gel, because I demonstrated that I was doing the work. Whereas I could have turned up with, you know, 30 kits of silica gel and bags for everyone, and they probably just sit in everyone's boot. And so we kind of didn't go down that path of kitting everyone up with dryers and hoping we'd get results. So I think if you actually started to demonstrate, then we could just say to the herbarium, hey, we need some silica gel, we need some bags. But in the interim, I've got a big supply of silica gel that I use. I buy my own sandwich bags. So yeah, it is a little bit of expense to me, but that's where we're at with citizen science. We're giving our time and a bit of our expense to buy sandwich bags and put all this stuff together. That's what citizen science is. We're providing the resources to do this work, unfortunately. But really, at the end of the day, what was good about having Megan Prance in the herbarium is she would rattle the cage and say, give us silica gel and give us bags, and we could actually get them. So we can do that. We can get silica gel and bags, but in the interim, you might need to buy your own. It's all gettable. Silica gel, I'm not sure where you get that from. Does anyone know? eBay? Yeah, eBay is a good place to get silica gel. Yeah, recovery from food, from what is it? Seaweed crisps or something like that. So we're talking about data returns. So of course, at the end of the year, when you've finished up, you need to provide a list of all your specimens to Vivian, our data collector, and she submits it to the Department of Environment Science, and that's a compliance issue with our permit. So again, it's a lot of information to absorb. Don't overthink it. Just do one collection. or just do one iNaturalist record to start with. Do one collection, one iNaturalist record, and bring it to the next meeting or something, and we'll get it to the herbarium. One nicely produced specimen, and just get confident that I can do this. It's not too hard, and then hopefully moving forward we'll get more collections, or come to our next foray, and you'll see as we go through and we identify fungi specimens in the field, you'll see the conversations we have around, is it a good specimen to collect? Is it worth collecting? And what sort of field information are we gathering? So the field information for boletes, as I've discussed, can be, you know, cutting them and observing the bruising. For agarix, if it's a amanita or an agaricus, you might smell it, look at the gills, the gill attachment. If it's a jelly, it's different. If it's a bird's nest, it's different. So for each morpho group, there's different sort of information requirements. And that's a lot of information to give to you all in one hit. So as you move forward, we'll give you that guidance. Sorry? So to give you an idea about a formal foray, which is you know, a bunch of people operating under a permit where we all turn up, on that day we'll have like a photographer, a foray leader, and then we have a scribe. And what happens is, you know, there's and then a specimen collector. So one person photographs with a tag, the scribe's recording all the information, the field notes, oh, Bruises Blue was next to eucalyptus, and they write down all the details, and then the foray leader will give it a field ID, and then it'll be boxed up, and then we'll move along to the next one. Oh yeah, this is a good one, and you'll see what happens in the field. And Fran's just talking about data we collect in the field, such as scent. That's right, yeah. And so for certain species too, there's things like lactarius and the milk. So for a lactarius, if I can show you a picture. So with a lactarius, if we think it's a lactarius, so lactarius and rossula tend to look the same. But if it's a lactarius, you know, this just gives you an indication of what we do in the field. You cut the gills, and you see how it produces a milk. We actually taste that milk, and we're looking for mild, nondescript, mild, bitter, or spicy. You know, and that's important information to collect. And any information we collect in the field is good. We've recently been looking at things like phosphorescence or fluorescence. And we have a black light over there for sale, but so just by using a black light. Russulas fluoresce and lactarius do not. So if you're like, is this russula or lactarius? Thanks, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thanks for being patient with us and for enjoying the sporadic delivery of information. And if I can, I'll share this on Facebook. Hopefully enough information has come through. Thanks. Bye now.